to you by Penguin. Belle by Lesley Pearse. Read by Baines. Chapter 1. London, 1910.
You must be a whore. You live in a brothel.
15-year-old Belle took a step back from the red-haired, freckle-faced boy and looked at him in consternation. He'd run after her down the street to return her hair ribbon, which had fallen off. That in itself was unusual enough around the teeming streets of Seven Dials, where practically everyone would pocket anything not nailed down. But then he'd introduced himself as Jimmy Riley, the recently arrived nephew of Garth Franklin, who owned the Ram's Head. They chatted for a while, and Jimmy asked if he could be her friend. Belle was thrilled. She liked the look of him, and she guessed he was close in age to her. But then he had to spoil it by asking if she minded being a whore.
If I lived in a palace, I wouldn't necessarily be a queen, she retorted angrily. It's true enough that I live in Annie's place, but I'm not a whore. Annie's my mother.
Jimmy looked hard at Belle, his tawny eyes repentant.
I'm sorry if I got it wrong. My uncle told me Annie's was a brothel, so when I saw you come out of there...
He broke off in embarrassment.
I really didn't mean to hurt your feelings.
Belle was even more confused then. She didn't think she'd ever met anyone before who cared whether they hurt her feelings. Her mother certainly didn't, or any of the girls in the house.
It's all right,
she replied, somewhat uncertainly.
You weren't to know. You haven't lived around here long enough. Is your uncle treating you well?
Jimmy shrugged.
He's a bully,
Belle stated, guessing that Jimmy had already been introduced to his uncle's fists, for it was common knowledge Garth Franklin was hot-tempered.
Do you have to stay with him? My mother always said I was to go to him if anything happened to her. She died last month, and Uncle paid for her funeral and said I was to come here to learn the trade.
Belle surmised by his gloomy tone that he felt obligated to stay.
I'm sorry about your mother, she said. How old are you? Nearly 17. My uncle said I've got to do some boxing to build up muscle. Jimmy responded with a cheeky grin. Ma always said it was better for a man to have brains and muscle, but maybe I can have both. Just don't assume all girls are whores, or you won't live to build up muscle, Belle said teasingly.
She was warming to him. He had a lovely smile and a softness to him which was very different to all the other boys around the area. Seven Dials wasn't far from the smart shops of Oxford Street, the theatres of Shaftesbury Avenue, or even the grandness of Trafalgar Square, but it was a million miles from gentility. Great swathes of its higgledy-piggledy tenements and rookeries might have been demolished in the last 20 years, but with Covent Garden Fruit and Vegetable Market still at its heart, and so many narrow lanes, courts and alleys all around, the newer buildings had soon become just as shabby as the old. Its residents were in the main the underbelly of society. Thieves, prostitutes, beggars, rogues and thugs, living alongside the poor who worked in the very lowliest of jobs, street sweepers, scavengers and labourers. On a grey, frosty January day, with many people bundled up against the cold in little more than rags, it was a depressing sight. Next time I rescue a pretty girl's hair ribbon, I'll be really careful what I say to her, Jimmy said. Your hair is lovely. I've never seen such shiny black curls before. And you've got pretty eyes, too. Belle smiled, because she knew her long curly hair was her best feature. Most people thought she...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?